All right. Thank you all for joining me today. I'd like to talk about Ian Stevenson, who is a University of Virginia professor and a psychiatrist who spent 40 years scientifically verifying the past life memories of more than 2,000 children between the ages of 2 and 7. Each of these young children believed that they remembered their most recent past life. Stevenson's research method regarding reincarnation was unique. He used his skills as a detective, an investigative reporter, and a social scientist. He methodically tracked down and interviewed firsthand the witnesses who personally knew a child who had memories of being part of a past life, being part of a family in a past life. These children typically began talking about their previous lives when they were 2 or 3 years old and stopped by the age of 6 or 7. From his research, Dr. Stevenson confirmed that we tend to lose our memories of past lifetimes after the age of 7. He paid special attention to statements that the child had made about the past life family. Then, using a scientific method, he located the family of the individual who had died and been reincarnated as that child. Professor Stevenson would then take the child to meet with those family members and find out how much the child remembered about his or her life with that family before he or she had died. When the child met the family that they claimed to be from, the child typically remembered so many specific details about that life. During the meeting, these memories were then confirmed by members of that family, from family secrets to family pet names. Dr. Stevenson would then cross-examine the family members involved, looking for possible bias for or against the child, as well as confirmations or conflicts in the child's recall of that past life person. His past life cases were located geographically around the globe. In fact, on all 5 continents. They were among peoples with varying cultural patterns, involved families who did not believe in reincarnation, and they were from societies where the religious dogma sternly preached against a belief in reincarnation. So what does the research show about past lives of children? His research showed that the previous lives of these children frequently ended prematurely and unnaturally, often involving violence, suicide, or an accident. In fact, in 75% of the cases, the previous personality died relatively young. On average, he found that the previous personalities died about 4.5 years before the birth of the child who remembered being that particular person. Since Dr. Stevenson's death, other researchers have followed his lead, and now more than 2,500 reports of children's past life memories have been studied. So here are several of Dr. Stevenson's cases. First involves Bangkuch Pramsin. As soon as he learned to talk, Bangkuch Pramsin of Thailand began to talk about his previous life. When the boy was 4 years old, Dr. Stevenson became involved with this case. The young lad had memories of being murdered 10 years before, and he said that he died in a neighboring town about 6 miles away. The boy recalled that his name in that previous life was Shamrat. Plus, he remembered the names of his parents from that life. The 4-year-old then described the specific details of the murder of Shamrat. This description included the names of his murderers, what they'd stolen from him, where on his body he'd been stabbed, and where his body had been dragged after he'd been killed. Dr. Stevenson then located the family and interviewed the family members. Shamrat's family confirmed almost everything that the boy had said about his previous life. The policeman who investigated Shamrat's murder further verified the names that the boy had identified as his murderers. Fascinating. Second example, Gopal Gupta. This 2.5-year-old boy told his parents about a past life that he'd previously lived in a city about 100 miles south of Delhi. The boy told his parents that his last name in that past life was Sharma. In that past life as Sharma, the young boy said he owned a company that was involved in medicines. He said he had a large house with a wife and 2 children, and he had 2 brothers. The boy remembered that he'd been shot and killed by one of his brothers after they'd argued over money. He even knew the name of his company in the previous life. Gopal's mother discouraged him from talking about the previous family, and Gopal's father was indifferent to the whole thing. Several years passed, and then Gopal's father went to that city, 100 miles away, where his son has said he lived. He looked up the business that Gopal had described, and he met the Sharma family. The boy was then taken to meet the family and identified several people and places that he had known in his previous life. In fact, Gopal's knowledge of the family was not public knowledge and was so convincing that members of the Sharma family believed him to be their son reincarnated. Here's another. A boy remembering being a 25-year-old mechanic who was thrown to his death from a speeding car on a beach road, and he recalled the name of the driver, the exact location of the crash, the names of the mechanic's sisters and parents and cousins, and the people he'd gone rabbit hunting with on the day of his death. Another example. One young girl Dr. Stevenson interviewed remembered being a teenager named Sheila, who was killed while crossing the road. She named the town where Sheila had lived, plus the names of Sheila's parents and siblings. When Sheila's family heard of the little girl's stories, they visited with her. Those attending this meeting said the girl recognized them by name and knew her relationships with them without any prompting. One final example. From the time he learned to talk, a boy in Virginia named Joseph called his mother by her first name and called his grandmother Mom. As he grew up, Joseph began remembering obscure events from the life of his Uncle David. His Uncle David, the brother of Joseph's mom, had died in an accident 20 years before Joseph was born. The uncle had been rarely mentioned because of the family's ongoing grief about his passing. So it was possible that Joseph was the reincarnation of his Uncle David. Dr. Stevenson also studied birthmarks and birth defects that might have had a past life connection. Over the years, he found that birthmarks and birth defects on living children were often confirmed in the medical autopsies, showing the location of the fatal wounds or birthmarks on the body of the past life personality, whom the child talked about being. As Professor Stevenson noted, and I quote, "It's certainly compelling to see or photograph the birthmark or birth defect on the client today, and then compare it to the autopsy report that pinpoints the type and the location of the wound from the past life," unquote. The odds against these birthmarks corresponding to previous wounds are low, about 1 in 25,000. Stevenson's research led to a book that he published described 210 cases of birthmarks and birth defects that he had verified, from birthmarks that resembled bullet holes to those that resembled axe wounds. The thoroughness with which Dr. Stevenson investigated these cases adds enormous weight to the conclusion that birthmarks and birth defects can be the result of reincarnation. Some examples. Dr. Stevenson recorded the case of a Turkish man who remembered a lifetime as a bandit who had shot himself to avoid being captured by the police. Stevenson's research showed that the Turkish man's birthmarks exactly matched the entry and exit wounds of the bandit's bullet wounds in the bandit's autopsy. Another example. Another client who recalled being shot in a past life possessed 2 birthmarks, a large ragged one over his left eye and a small round one on the back of his head, which lined up like a bullet's entrance and exit wounds. Again, fascinating stories that perhaps in fact were true. So now I'd like to move on and talk about a client from several years ago who remembered a verified past life. Let's say the name of the client was Mario. And the reason he sought me out for a past life regression session was he wanted to resolve issues related to his desire to sing opera. He was an opera buff who loved to just practice singing opera arias, but he had problems doing that. Plus, he was curious about his past lives. Mario turned out to be a 27-year-old Italian airline pilot who, in his spare time, is passionate about being an opera singer. He came to me because he was concerned that he was unable to trill his R's when he sang. Mario felt that the base of his tongue was pressing down on his voice box. He told me that this did not feel right in his throat, and he was wondering if this was causing problems with his singing. And if so, did he have a past life connection, and could we resolve it so that he could sing opera much more easily? So I took him to a past life regression, and Mario found himself aboard a German submarine with 98 sailors on board off the coast of Sicily in 1944. He was newly married because he'd gotten the girl pregnant. As he moved forward in this life, he realized that his wife had given birth to a son, and then his wife had died. We learned that earlier in this past life, his German father had been in the military, and Dad had wanted his son to enter the German military as well. The father thought that the military would instill something good into the son. We then discovered that the father had died just before the beginning of World War II. So, with the start of the war, Mario, as in that past life, believed that he had to enlist in the Navy to please his father. "I have to go fight," he said. He then saw himself on board the submarine as it was in deep underwater. When I asked him what he did aboard the sub, he replied, "I sink other ships." So, as we moved forward to the next important event, when something changes, the submariner discovered that his submarine had been torpedoed by an Allied warship. He understood that there was no way that he and the other men on board his sub could be saved. As the submarine sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean, he felt his throat constrict from the pressure and the eventual loss of oxygen. Death soon followed, and he felt very angry at the captain of the sub and equally upset that he would never see his newborn son again. At the time of the death of the submariner, I asked him to move out of his physical body and into the man's spirit body. "How does that feel?" I asked. "Lighter," he replied. We then moved in that spirit body into the bardo, an in-between place between lifetimes that the Tibetan Buddhists talk about, and you get there through your imagination. So in the bardo, I invited him to come to closure with all those with whom you have unfinished business in that life we just explored. "Who shows up first?" I asked him in the bardo. "My dad," the submariner says. "Okay, what do you want to say to your father that you could not say to him before your dad died?" I asked. Here we learned that the father had forced his son to join the Navy, even though the son really wanted to become a musician. What followed in their conversation back and forth regarding what had occurred were feelings of hurt, misunderstanding, and so on between father and son. By the time this ended, we'd achieved a feeling of forgiveness between both the submariner and his father. I then asked Mario to look into the eyes of his father in that lifetime. "Does he remind you of anyone in your present lifetime as Mario?" "Yes," he said. "He is my nephew today." And with this, we came to closure with the father. Who shows up next in the bardo? I asked him. My wife, he said, as the submariner. The two talked about their love for one another, the birth of their son, and his wife's early death. Again, through this back and forth dialogue, the two reached closure. We then learned that in Mario's current life, this woman is Mario's mother. Who comes in next? I asked. The captain of that submarine, he said. If your heart could speak to that captain, what would you say to him now, heart to heart? I asked. And a lot of blame and anger were expressed by the submariner towards the captain. How does the captain respond? The captain apologized, saying that he was doing the best that he could do at the time, but he was outmaneuvered by the U.S. Allied warship. So they eventually reached closure. When I asked him to look into the eyes of the captain, down into his very soul, Mario realized that this was the same person in his life today as Mario's father. The two had had contentious issues as Mario was growing up in his current life. Next, the young son of the submariner arrived, and the two dialogued back and forth before coming to closure. We learned that the soul of his son in that past life was not currently in Mario's present life, but his son was available from the spirit realm to help Mario whenever he needed assistance in moving forward in his life. When I asked if there were anyone else with whom the submariner needed to come to closure, we learned that Mario's grandfather had just arrived. We were told that the grandfather was now available to help Mario in his current lifetime. So Mario was instructed to feel his grandfather's presence. He's always there with him, giving Mario strength through his hands. At the very end of the session in the bardo, I asked the submariner if he were willing to forgive himself for all the choices he'd made in that past life that had been created from the guilt and anger and fear had created this guilt, anger, and fear in Mario's present life. After all, from these meetings we'd had with key past life personalities during the regression, the German submariner had either forgiven or asked for forgiveness when appropriate, which had been granted by all those involved. Can you look into your eyes now and forgive yourself? I asked. When Mario said yes and did so, he felt an immediate shift, a letting go within his own being from all that he was still carrying that had occurred during that past lifetime. In fact, simultaneously, he felt a physical sensation, a change in the back of his throat. In coming out of the session, Mario remembered everything that happened. Plus, I gave him a recording of the session. He was pleased. About a week later in my follow-up session to see how things had been going since our regression, Mario reported that he had felt a definite improvement in his ability to sing. He did not yet sing like Pavarotti, he told me, but he felt much more in control of his throat muscles. Then, to my surprise, Mario told me that he'd gone onto the internet and had done some research into World War II submarines that belonged to Germany. It turns out there's a website devoted to German submarines. Who knew? Based on his memories uncovered during the session, Mario was able to find the exact submarine on which he had served and died. The captain's name was the same, and the date of the sinking corresponded with the date he remembered from our regression. So fascinating regression from my perspective and from his. That certainly proved to me that past lives do exist. Holly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. Well, we have time for questions and answers after we get the presentation. So if you have questions, take notes so you can ask your questions. Okay, we're going to hear from Ann Barham next, who is a long-time board certified regression therapist.
I know. Don't remind me of how long.
You and I, babe, we've been here a long time.
I'm coming to the point where I'm, getting really, I'm retired, and then I keep getting people that want a session. So it's like, okay, one more. But
She's retired.
Peter, thanks for the review of even Stevenson's work. I loved his books. I always thought his work was really fascinating. And I was so happy when Jim Tucker continued to do that at University of Virginia. So that's great. So what I'm going to do is to share a story from probably at least 20 years ago, when I was more new in the profession, and which was very profound. And I wrote about it in my book. And so I'm going to read some of it because a lot of the information that the client gave me before and after is what's really relevant to demonstrating that seems to be a past life that was validated by the client. So this was a young man that came to me. He was about 24 years old, and he was not into this kind of thing at all. And but he had this dream about being in Vietnam and being a sniper behind the scenes and dying in a very painful death. He got caught by the enemy. And at the end of the dream, he got this message that the number 3501 was very, very important, and he needed to remember that. And he was also told a few things about what his name was and the year of his death, which he was told was 1970. And he was saying, oh my gosh, but I was born in 1972, so how can that be? And he was told by this voice, well, because of a traumatic death, that's enough time. It turns around really fast. So this validates a lot of the things that you were saying. Anyway, so the other reason that this really got his attention was he was out drinking, young man out drinking too much. He's driving home in the back of his buddy's pickup truck, and he's saying, 3501, I'm okay. 3501, I'm okay. And his buddies are like, what the hell? Is that an address? What is this? And he has no idea what it is, but that was the phrase that kept coming up. So I guess someone had suggested to him, well, maybe this relates to a prior lifetime. He got hold of me, and he told me when he showed up for the session that he was about to cancel because he just thought this was just too weird. And then he saw a license plate that had 3501 on it. So he decided he really needed to go through with this session, right? So what, let's see, what I wanted to share from what he had originally told me. So he talked about various places where he was shot in the dream. And then we go into the regression, and we go right into a scene where he's on the couch and he's kicking, and just like you can tell, this is a person that is in a situation that really wants to get out of there, but feels really trapped. And he starts describing that he's hiding in the bushes, and he knows that there's a Viet Cong out there, and that he was supposed to assassinate this captain, but his whole squad got wiped out, and he was the only one left. And he's hiding there with his rifle, but he's out of ammunition. So he pretty much knows this is really bad news. And what the Viet Cong yells out to him is, throw your gun down, come out of the bushes, we'll kill you quickly, I promise. So he's panicking. He's like, I have, what am I going to do? There's nobody else here. Maybe I should just throw down my rifle and come out. So I kind of took a break with him a little bit to get some background. And he was able to identify that his name was Corporal Matthews, and he was from Albany, New York, and he had been a draftee. And he wasn't quite, we tried to get a first name. He wasn't quite clear on it, but he thought it was something similar to his current name, which is John, but he wasn't exactly sure. And so he was selected to go into special forces because he was a really good shot. He didn't particularly like the idea of special forces, but he figured maybe that would help him stay alive. And he talked about a lightning bolt patch that he wore on his shoulder, and that there were 8 men in his unit, and there was a Sergeant Woods that led his unit. So he's going back and forth. Do I come out? Do I not? And he finally decides, oh, so then I said, okay, well, let's talk about what you would have done with your life if you hadn't gotten drafted. And he says, oh, well, I wanted to go into the NYPD, which is the New York Police Department. So he wanted to be a cop in that prior life. And then I said, well, what's this 3501? What does that signify? And he goes, oh, that's the last four numbers of the serial number of our rifle. We were taught to memorize our serial number and to know that as long as we had that rifle with us, that we would be safe. So that was the significance of this 3501. So we go back into the action. He finally decides he's going to come out to the bushes and just get killed, easily by this guy. And he thinks about killing himself, but he says, but I'm Catholic. That would be a sin. I'd go to hell if I kill myself. So, I'm going to turn myself over to this guy and to his mercy. And instead of killing him quickly, instead they sort of torture him, and he shoots him in the knee, shoots him in the groin, he shoots him at the side of the head, and then finally kills him. And so it's not fun for sure. But shortly after that, he goes into the, as you call it, the Bardo state. I just call it the inner life, and we look at the lessons and all that type of thing. And but the important thing that I wanted to share, which gives this validation, is the email that I got from him about a week later. And he says, and this is where I'm going to read to you, some very interesting things have revealed themselves since our session. Of course, I tried to find John Matthews, but there was no match. But I did find a Joseph Matthews, who was killed in 1967 in the Kwantung province near the DMZ. 3,000 Marines were overrun during a battle there. Also, Joseph was an assault man who died of small arms fire. How this information relates to me: in my time in the Army, so he had been in the Army in the present life as well, I was surprised to find that I had this ability for warfare. I was written up by a 2-star general during one exercise because I destroyed an entire squad of 12 military police officers single-handedly. I never received any specialized training in combat other than basic training, but it just came so easy to me. I attribute this to my past life experience and training. And then he gets into the details of Marine groups and how men are grouped and the number of people in a squad and all this, and it validates for him the same information that he got from his regression. And then this is really interesting. He says, I have a large tattoo on my back that goes from the base of my neck to the bottom of my back, and it's a large tiger that seems as if he's looking over his shoulder at you. I had this done before we ever had our session. When I saw this picture of the tiger tattoo, it just clicked for me, and I paid quite a bit of money to have it done. Imagine my surprise when during my research, I found that the Special Forces training area from the Vietnam War was called Tigerland. Mm. During our session, I saw that I was in Special Forces. During my research, I also found that soldiers became very uneasy when it got quiet. And that was something he talked about in the regression, was it was just too quiet, and that made him very, very uncomfortable. And he says a lot of non-vets speak about that when it got quiet, they got very scared. I could hear the terror in my voice from the recording when I spoke about how quiet it was. And he says, after listening to my session and the research I've done on the subject, there's no doubt in my mind that I was in Vietnam and died there. And then he talks about how this has really led him into a much bigger spiritual exploration. And he's never had the dream again. And then I talked with him again about 10 years later when I was writing the book, and I wanted to just kind of touch base with him and say, well, how's it been? How's it going? And it was really pretty incredible. He said he went to the Vietnam Memorial and found what he considered his name, Joseph Matthews on the memorial. I mean, it still gets me because he said it was just so moving for him. It was a huge emotional experience for him. And he tried to find other details about Corporal Matthews. He went to the location of Matthews' home of record in Albany, New York, but the lot was now empty. There was no house on it anymore. And he couldn't really find any records. And then he actually went and tried to get into military records. But since she had been in special forces, a lot of that was still all sealed and closed. So he couldn't really go there. But despite all that, he very much believed that he was this Corporal Joseph Matthews, and that it really made a huge difference for him. And the interesting thing also is he shared that he had in this life been in the police department. So it was the same wish that Corporal Matthews had originally had that he had fulfilled now. And then some 10 years later, he was actually now running his own security firm somewhere. He'd finally gotten out of the police department, but was running a security firm. So he was still continuing a lot of that same energy. And we did identify, you know, like a girlfriend then as a wife now and that kind of stuff. But it really, what to me was so poignant was how much he identified with being this individual, and how you really tell a lot of times with the emotional impact with people, how real it is. And for him to have actually gone to the memorial and found his name and been so incredibly moved by that, it was really very, very touching. So that was the story I wanted to share.
Thank you, Anne. For those of you who were fascinated by Anne's story, she wrote a chapter in our book that's also a verifiable past life of Johann Sebastian Bach that is fascinating. So give it a read if you haven't read it so far. You've been lucky to have these wonderful clients.
I've had some amazing clients. Yeah.
Amazing clients, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to hear from Susan Lyons. She's a clinical hypnotherapist. She has a private practice in Northern California, and Susan is on the board of directors with us at IBRT. And she has a very special personal experience because her grandfather was a past life regression therapist who did research on reincarnation. So she's going to share about that legacy and how she got inspired to become a past life therapist from her grandfather.
Thank you, Holly.
Welcome.
So, yes, I'm constantly inspired, and I'm constantly finding little tidbits and little breadcrumbs of information throughout the years, because when my grandfather passed away unknowingly, and I was in my 20s at the time, had no idea that I would eventually become a hypnotherapist. But when he passed away, I asked for all of his hypnotherapy material, which was a cache of lots of books, a lot of stuff on Edgar Cayce, and a bunch of his also research materials. So he was really into finding verifiable facts through the regressions that he was doing and his research. And so there is a story told in this book about a regression that my grandfather did where they were actually able to verify some information. And this book is by Just Stern, Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation, and it was published in 1965. And this is obviously the original copy from my grandfather that I've kindly keep in a very safe place. So my grandfather was a psychologist and a hypnotherapist back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, probably as well. So I'm going to recount this story. There's a couple of characters to kind of set this up so that this makes sense. There's a woman named Marcia who is recounting this story to Just Stern in the book. So that's Marcia, and she has a great interest in past lives, yoga, and reincarnation. And she's telling the story to actually Just Stern. And then the other major character in this, her name is Pearl Roseborough, and she was the subject that was hypnotized and remembered this past life. And actually, I had to narrow this story down a little. It goes on quite a bit longer, and it was a 5-hour-long regression where he took her through childhood experiences, the in-between, and did 2 past lives during this session. So I narrowed it down to just the really juicy stuff. Apparently, several individuals were regressed during this group of sessions that was happening. But I will present this one because there is some verifiable information. So a woman named Marcia was present in this recalling the session she witnessed that day, conducted by my grandfather, Kenneth Lyons, a psychologist in Boston at the time. As Marcia recounted this regression, Miss Roseborough, in trance, had been taken back to a so-called life in India, a land where she had never been or read of to any extent. She mentioned the names of people she had known then and a village in which she had lived. It was a hardly pronounceable name. In even tones, still in a hypnotic trance, she went through the various stages of her life, the joys and some of the sorrows, the good and the bad, and then she came to the climax, a fire. In this fire, her hands were mutilated and she perished, suffering dreadfully for 2 days, moaning about her disfigured fingers. So later, Marcia, seated behind her, leaned forward and asked Pearl casually, "Have you any feeling about fires?" And Pearl responded, "I've always been afraid of them," which is a natural response for probably most of us. And then Marcia asked, "Have you ever had any psychological feeling about your hands?" And Miss Pearl Roseborough held up both hands. "Look," she says, with an enigmatic smile, "I have no joint in either one of my thumbs." So the effort was made to check back on the names of Pearl Roseborough's, the names that she had recalled. It was impossible to trace back obscure personalities from hundreds of years ago. However, Marcia said that they did discover that such a village as the one she mentioned had indeed existed long ago, though it had been disappeared from the map. So Marcia's report, to be honest, was rather sketchy. And so she told Jess, "Well, why don't you check for yourself?" There were dozens of people there witnessing this regression. As I looked into it, I found 60 people had been present during the regression at Canterbury, New Hampshire, as Pearl, Miss Roseborough, had been chosen as a subject quite by chance. Okay, so she didn't volunteer for this necessarily. Dr. Lyons regressed the subject, deepening the hypnosis gradually, first taking her back to her 5th birthday. It was a big day. She described her family taking her on the trolley to Rose Wharf in Boston and on a boat ride in Provincetown. As her trance became deeper, Lyons suggested she was back in infancy. She mentioned being 4 years old, sitting up in her crib. Her hand went to her throat and she began gasping. "I can't breathe. I hit my head." And then my grandfather suggested that choking feeling will disappear. And Pearl became calm. Now the keenly awaited moment had arrived. "You're going to go even deeper into trance," Dr. Lyons says, "and you're going to feel very good. You will let your mind run free back and forth in time, and then take your thoughts back to a time before you were born in this body." There was a dramatic pause, and the question, "Where are you?" And Pearl replied softly, "India." The year was 1212 AD, and she was a 12-year-old child. Her father was a silk merchant, and her name was Chango, which seemed more Chinese than Indian. At 20, she had married a university professor and moved into a community called Targon or Taigon. The pronunciation was unclear in her trance voice. Lyons attempted to take her back to her 50th year. She shook her head and said, "I'm dead." She had died several years earlier in a fire that had swept through her home, perishing in the horror that Marcia had already mentioned earlier. As Pearl described her 2 days of dying, her face and body withered in agony, and she glanced down at her hands in terror. "I long for my release." A look of anguish was replaced by one of serenity. She had found her peace. She was dead. And where has she gone? Between lives, waiting to return again in spirit. An audience member had passed this question, and he relayed it. Pearl hesitated only slightly. I feel suspended in light, air, and sky. The heavens are above me. I see no people anywhere, but I feel vibrations, rhythms, and pulsations on all sides. It was evidential, but not striking. And so my grandfather, Dr. Lyons, went on to explore another life with her, this one in England in the year 1636. Eventually, Pearl was brought back to the 20th century as a post-hypnotic suggestion. Dr. Lyons advised her that she remember everything that had transpired while she was in hypnosis and feel good about it. The session had lasted 5 hours. Everybody was exhausted except for Pearl. She could have lived another life or two. She was so exhilarated by the experience. So intrigued she became an amateur investigator along with her husband, Ray Rossborough, a practical businessman. They were so intrigued. They scoured almanacs. They found no mention of Taigong or Taigong in India or Burma, though Burma had once been an Indian province. Then an unexpected source shed light on the mystery. Evelyn Boynton, a librarian at Colby College, had attended the regression session in New Hampshire, leaving highly skeptical. But 2 weeks later, she wasn't so sure. She made a discovery that indicated a city called Targon or Taigon or Taegung, depending on the pronunciation, had in fact existed at the time Pearl described, though it had since vanished from the maps. Reviewing her findings, she had submitted a report, scant though it was, to Charles Bud Thompson, head of the New Hampshire Psychic Research Group, who I believe was sponsoring this whole regression event. And I'm going to read the letter because I have the actual copy of the letter dated October 1st, 1965. This is my grandfather's stuff. Dear Bud, I attended the meeting in a lukewarm frame of mind on the possibility of reincarnation and came home fascinated but certainly uncommitted. I think knowing the wiles of the subconscious mind makes one prone to doubt any demonstration of this sort, however skillfully managed. Then, puttering about in the Colby College library recently, I picked up a book on India. And well, here's the story, just in case you haven't discovered it for yourself yet. Taking note on Pearl's story, I recorded the name of the place that she lived with various spellings: Targon, Chaigong, Chargon, Taigong, several iterations of the name here. In a handbook for travelers in India, Burma, and Ceylon, published in 1938, appears the following. A trip from Bangkok to Mogok and Mandalay, sorry for my pronunciations, Burma. About 50 miles above the Baekgyeon, Taegan is reached on the banks of the Irrawaddy, on the oldest and most important one of the oldest and most important capitals of Burma, sometimes spoken of as Old Pagan. As Taegong ceased to have any importance some hundreds of years ago, there are no ruins to be found, though the mounds of the marshes near it may hold the future yield important results. And then when you go to look at the history of Burma, Burma is a country of discarded capital cities. At Taigong, on the left bank of the Irrawaddy, far to the north of the Katha district, there are traces of the royal city, which is said to date back to the 9th century BC. The Burmese who founded it were driven south in the 2nd century AD to Pagan. In 1287, Pagan became a fiduciary of China, which claimed descent from the kings of Taigong, restored Burmese supremacy in 1364, and set up his capital near Mandalay. And it is signed the librarian Evelyn Boynton. So it's super fascinating. And then just to wrap it up, the Roseboroughs took Pearl's past lives in stride. They lived in a modest two-family house, which they owned, modestly furnished. The only costly thing around here, the husband had said, waving his arms around, was the bill for the flame proofing. We fireproofed everything from drapes to slip covers. He smiled quizzically. Ever since I've known her, and that goes back a lifetime, Pearl has been mortally afraid of fires. So not only validating this lost city, but also this disfigurement that she had in her fear of fires. And I'll just make one final note. And this was actually new to me when I was putting this together. That my grandfather had stated, and this is in the book too, that he had begun the whole interest in reincarnation and past life regressions. He was very hopeful, and he really believed in hypnotherapy, but the subject of reincarnation he was very skeptical about. And he began his investigations into past life regressions as a rebuttal to the Bridey Murphy case. I was out to prove reincarnation so much nonsense, he admitted. Instead, as I regressed people, a pattern began to emerge. They talked of leaving their bodies the same way and being reborn the same way.
Wow.
Hard to pronounce some of that. Apologies.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And now Virginia Waldron, who is also on our board of directors. She is the editor of our newsletter, which we are very grateful for. And she's the owner of the Rose Heart Center, where she does her practice, and also is starting up a new business with a friend and fellow therapist that is just about to be birthed in New York. And she's got 2 manuals on past life therapy. If you haven't read them, look them up. She's got wonderful, wonderful resources to train people, and she will be continuing to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Holly. The story that I want to share with you is from a client from October 2011. And I wrote an article for the International Journal, the Journal for International Past Life Regression Therapy. Journal, it should be the International Journal. Anyway, I sent Holly a copy of the article, a PDF form, so that if anyone wants to read the whole thing, they can. It's issue number 24. And I'm going to tell you some about the client's experience, but mostly I want to talk about what she found online, because she found photographs that supported the evidence that this life took place. Her name is Kathy, and she came to me in 2010. She just had questions about her purpose and some issues that she was struggling with in her personal life. She was adopted and raised in a loving adopted family, and always had what she needed and felt safe and everything. But she always felt like she didn't fit in, and she couldn't figure out why. And so we were going to just see what we could find. She didn't have a specific agenda other than to understand these aspects of her life. And so the first part of the article is her view of it. She says, I grew up Catholic. She loved her church, but she also knew that there was more to it. And she was a reader and read lots of books about religion and spirituality. And she fell across first Dr. Brian Weiss's book, Only Love is Real. And then she got her hands on Michael Newton's books. And that just, opened her right up. And so she wanted to know more. And she went into a past life from the, I want to say, mid-1800s. So that's why there's photographs, because by that time there were already pictures, the black and whites and stuff being published. So she went into a past life of a girl named Sophie, who, when she was, I think when she was, I don't know, 10, I'm looking, I think when she was 10, her little brother was born, and her mother went into such a severe postpartum depression that she left. She went to town and never came back, and the girl never found out what happened to her mother, and the father wouldn't talk about it. And so it was just her and her father and the little brother, and she became like the housekeeper, chief cook and bottle washer until she got married. And she married a man named Theodore, and she kept wanting to call him Ted, but which is a modern nickname for Theodore. But in that past life, he called himself Theo, which is an interesting shift there. And she said that, of course, Sophie, the girl Sophie was her name, was her father is her husband in her current life, and Theo was her first boyfriend. So, she went through the lives. We always go, I call it Circle of Friends, where you look at the people in that life, that you spent that life with. What do they want to say to you? What do you want to say to them? To get some closure. And then are they in your current life today? And what is it you're working on with each other in your current life? And a lot of the people in that life are in her life again today. So then when she went back home, she wanted to know more. So she started doing research, and she found that they had taken place in the middle of the United States. She found the names Sophie and Theodore, and the man's name was Theodore Polar. And she said, I knew he didn't come from our town. Well, he didn't. He was from Germany. He was an immigrant. So can I do a screen share to show you these pictures?
It should
Let me
be
see
on
if I
the bottom, the
Yeah.
green
Yeah.
square.
So this is one of the pictures that she found, and you can see Theo Polar Mercantile. That was her husband, and they lived in the upstairs apartment. And her death, she said, I'm not in the farmhouse. We left the farmhouse. I'm living in the apartment above the store, and that's where I died. And it was in that building. She also found the names of her children and a photograph of her husband. And this is a photograph of the Mercantile today. So it's still there. The building is still there. And she said that it made her feel, because she was one classic one. You come out of it. You all had clients that do this. I just made that up, right? That was out of my imagination. That wasn't real, right? Because your conscious mind wants to rationalize, and doesn't want to accept it as real. So you kind of convince yourself. And she was doing that. And then when she came, which one of the reasons why she did the research, when she came across these pictures, she went, oh, it was real. Huh. And she also, and I don't have this in the article, a photograph of her husband, Theo, after she passed away, because he became involved in local politics. And there's a picture of him. And she said that was him. So she validated for herself, confirmed for herself that it was real. She didn't make it up. And she went, in her current life, she went through a lot of stuff, and she had a lot of issues that were resolved by finding out about this previous life. And then when in the circle of friends, her father came to say goodbye, and her father and her mother. It turns out the mother went into town and killed herself. That's why she never came home from the postpartum, because it wasn't recognized in those days. And that the father went into town and found her and had her buried and didn't say anything because he couldn't talk about it. So in her current life, Kathy says that she and her husband, who was the father, talk about everything. That's the whole point. Learn to communicate. I think that's all the pictures. So she started out kind of a skeptic, but she wanted to know, and she is totally convinced that this is definitely part of our experience on our journeys, and it has given her whole life another layer, a three-dimensional layer. She told me. So that's one of them. Do I have time to share a second one?
Yes.
Okay, because I think this is really interesting. This wasn't my excuse me. This wasn't my regression. It was a student in one of my training programs, and I have them practice with each other, and then they come back and share their experience. And this student, I'm going to call her Anita, came back and said that she had been living as an villager in northern Canada, and the date was during World War II era. And she said, they're blowing up the village. Everything is burning and I'm burning. And I said, who's blowing up the village? The Americans. I said, why would the Americans blow up a village in northern Canada? That doesn't make sense. So she went back and looked it up. And this is what I find interesting, that we think we know history, but past life regression can correct our historical knowledge. That in northern Canada, there were oil fields. And this is a village of Inuits that worked the fields. And this was right when Japan was getting involved, and Japan was encroaching and getting closer and closer to that area. And the Americans didn't want Japan to get those oil fields. So everyone was told to leave, but many of the local Inuits refused because that's where they've always lived, and they got blown up. And so it's just interesting to see that history, and aside from that, that was a story that was not taught in history. That was kind of covered up and only recently shared, so that she had to go hunting to find it. And so it's just interesting the way this kind of almost double validates that these are humans that lived then and we're alive now. So that's my story.
Okay, let's open up for questions, comments, shares, whatever anybody wants to bring to the circle. Anybody want to? Yeah, Carol.
So excited about this because I have psychically put a call out to the universe, but I had not done it physically yet, about regression therapists who have had cases of verified past lives. So I'm just over the moon with what you are talking about. My work has actually gotten involved with more of the researchers. So I've learned a lot of protocol, and that was one of the reasons why I was interested to, they're so focused on the cases like Stevenson. And but I just know that this is happening with all of us. It's happened for me personally. In fact, the researcher Jim Matlock, in reading my book, said, you've got cases there that are verified, my own personal cases. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but when I walked through the protocol and I reviewed the information about my cases, I thought, I know exactly what he's talking about. So I'm actually writing about that now. So I'm going to get with you guys to get more information about your cases for what I'm writing. So thank you so much for sharing. That was awesome.
I think we've all had stories like that. In our careers, we've all encountered clients who want to know more. They want to go back. I mean, I have several more that, besides those two, that they want to find out more. What additional information can they add and flesh out these stories? Because they don't get all the details. They don't get a lot of the smaller details. And so they go back, and God bless Google, God bless the internet. They can now. And a lot of them are doing that.
Anybody else? Comments, questions, observations, anything? Kathy?
I loved this. Thank you, everyone, for sharing this. I believe it. I've believed it for a long time. I think we believe it, that those of us that do the work, because it's so real. But I'm just curious if any of you have ever seen this boy. He's 9 now, but when he was 4 years old, he said to his mother, "I'm a fashion designer and I need a mannequin." And they taught him how to sew, and he's been designing clothes, and he's actually doing runway show model shows. He's 9 now, and he's been doing this since he was 4. And he's on Instagram, and he's amazing. His name is Max, and he's and all I can think of when I watch Max is this is like his past life just came through him, without any like there was no resistance, because his mother just let him do it, and it's amazing. And stars like Sharon Stone is one of his models on his Instagram feed, because he sends her clothes, and she'll do it on, she'll go, and he's super creative, and it's just incredible. So his name is Max. And if you want to look him up on Instagram, I should have pulled this up before I spoke, but he's here it is. He's couture. It's COUTURE .2.the.max. Couture to the max, with periods in between it all. And he does all kinds of silly things, but he also, when they went on a beach vacation, he drew new designs in the sand. I mean, he just can't stop. He goes to school, and then he comes home and he wants to sew. It's just an incredible child that I thought you all might want to look at. He's fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think what Peter shared about Ian Stevenson's work, I'd read his books, but I'd forgotten this point, Peter, that he thought his theory was that most of these children are reincarnated from people who had died very young and hadn't completed their lives. And they come back very quickly, so they can kind of almost pick up where they left off.
Right.
And that's what it sounds like this Max guy is doing. So I would love to have someone regress him and find out what's going on.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I know,
I've
right?
seen that over and over again with clients, that if it was a sudden death or a traumatic death and they didn't get to complete, that they turn around pretty quick usually, and it's to finish and complete what they weren't unable to finish in the prior lifetime. So it's that drive for wholeness and completion that doesn't give up.
I knew a couple once, and she was 33 years older than him. 33? He's my age, and she was 33. Yeah. And I did regression with him, and he was born the same year that this woman was born. But he went through World War II and died and came right back. But it was the next generation. It was actually this woman's son's generation. And he was a friend of the woman's son. And that's how he met her. And
did they know, could they identify that he had known her in
not at that point.
Existence?
By the time I got to know them, she was in her 70s and he was in his 50s. Or whatever. He was my generation. She was the next generation older than us. And once they got back together, that was it. That, she left her husband, they got married. They've been married for many, many years before she passed. But it was very clear that he wasn't supposed to die in that plane, but he came right back the first train out, so he could be back with her. It just took a little longer to get that connection going. And I always thought that was a very sweet story. We never validated it with her. We never regressed her. I mean, I regressed her, but that didn't come up. But it did very much come up with him. I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah, I'll just say that, somebody here was saying earlier, like we all believe, right? Because we're doing this work, and it's because we see it, we see the emotion, and you can feel it.
Oh yeah.
When it's real, you can feel it. And I've almost never had somebody recount a story where I'm like, oh, they're making it up. It does not feel like that at all. I think we're really blessed to do the work that we do. Really blessed.
I've had a couple where they said one thing and they went, no, I mean this. Like one of them said, oh yeah, I think that person is my mother, my current life. No, it's not my mother, it's you. And I went, no, it's not. I mean, I didn't say that to him. It's like, no, it's not me. And another person did a similar thing. So it's like they made a mistake. They didn't want something to be true, so they shifted it. But the story was real. It's just the conscious mind was interfering. I don't want that to be true. So,
well, one of the things I always remind clients of is that even in our current life, our memories are not 100% accurate on all the details of things.
Oh, yeah.
And you might talk to 5 different people about a certain event and they'll remember it differently. So
right.
I always go after what's the impact, what's the message, what's the lesson, not whether we got every single detail right. And that usually helps people also to kind of relax around all that instead of worrying about, oh, was it really 1843 or was it 1847? It's like, it doesn't matter. We're just kind of ballparking on some of this and we're looking for the impact. So memory's a funny thing.
Well, I'm glad you said that about impact, because I did one and I just felt kind of through the whole thing that she wasn't really reaching any details. And I thought, well, she might be disappointed because she's not finding, anything that's very interesting. And by the time it was over, she had tears running down her face just because the love that she felt from her mother was a love she never felt from her own mother in this life.
Yeah.
And that was just the total impact for her and made a huge difference for her. So she was like totally in love with the process and what we went through. So
that's what she needed to get.
We can't judge what's happening in them. Yeah.
I've had some clients, and I'm sure you've all had this, they're so deadpan during the regression, and it's like there's like zero emotion showing on their face or whatever. And at the end of the session, they'll go, oh my God, that was so intense. Yeah. Like, okay, I'm glad. Just people express in such different ways that you really can't judge it. You just have to go with whatever and let it be what it is for them. And sometimes the details don't matter for some people, and other people, they're really into the nitty-gritty details. So it's pretty fun. It keeps it interesting, doesn't it? And fluid all the time.
Lots of surprises all the time.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, I got the correct date for you on the Hans Tindem mentoring, which is Sunday, the 25th of May at 8 a.m. Pacific time.
25th of May.
And
And Andy is going to be in June on the 21st of June at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Okay.
So Virginia was listening to our audiobook, and we had a little faux pas on the recording that just got repaired today.
Oh,
so
good.
We just submitted it for publishing our audiobook. So if you have a little glitch and you're trying to order the audiobook, it may take a while till the new one's online.
It's not that big a glitch, and it really does. Listening to that book made it so three-dimensional. I mean, I read it, and then I bought the audio and listened to it, and it was so much more to listen to it. It was really cool.
Our gal did a fabulous job on the recording.
Yes, she did.
She really did. Okay, well, bless you all for the work you're doing. Thank you for being a part of community and sharing. And thank you for the presenters, especially today. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yes, it was great. Thank
Found
you,
the
everyone.
perfect time for us to be doing this work to make a difference, you guys. This is so important.
Amen. Yeah.
Help people wake up to the reality of who we are is the bottom line. That's the only thing that's going to save us from ourselves. Okay, see you next
All
time.
right.
All
Thanks,
right.
Holly.
Good night. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Holly.
Bye.